So Luka Doncic is not in your top 5. Is that because the Mavs are struggling relative to the other guys on the, in the standings in their conference?
Yes, because not only do you have to have great individual numbers, but your team has to be winning. Your team can't be sitting at the number 9th or 10th spot at a 500 record, and you expect for him to be in the MVP conversation.
I think Perk might actually be onto something. Is Luka an MVP candidate? No. Okay, let me backtrack a little bit. Luka is a talented player, and I'm not trying to dispute that. Luka is a very gifted player. In fact, he's been playing pro basketball since he was like 17. Do you want to know what kind of basketball I was playing at 17? Yeah, it was YMCA ball, but I'd say we're pretty good. All jokes aside, Luka is a talented player, and I know some people will say, oh, he cries for fouls. Trust me, I've seen it a million times. But when it comes to skill and other aspects of the game, Luka Doncic has just that. In fact, like I mentioned earlier, I think Luka Doncic is a top 5 player in the NBA. There aren't many players who I think are better than Luka, and if there is a list, it's a very short list. But there are some reasons why he shouldn't win MVP or even be considered, which is so funny considering I picked him to win the MVP this year. However, the only reason why I said he would win MVP is on some factors that are not lining up right now. First, I want to look at Luka's play style. This is something that's been talked about recently, and I want to bring some more light on it. Luka's an ISO player, we all know that, and there are a lot of great players in the NBA that are ISO heavy players. And something I want to look at is his usage percentage, something that I haven't really brought up in the past, but I feel like is very important with context. For those that don't know what usage percentage is, basically it just determines how much a player does when he's on the floor. Another way of saying it is just basically how much of the plays are being ran by him. Now, the average NBA player has a usage percentage of about 20%, which I think we can all agree is pretty common for a player to have. So what about the biggest ISO heavy guys in the game? What are their usage percentages? Well, to crack the top 10, you would need about a 30.9 usage percentage, which is what Jaylen Brown has. Kevin Durant, someone that definitely does rely on his mid-range game, which is very ISO heavy, has about a 32% usage percentage, which would only get you to the top 7. Just above him is James Harden with a usage percentage of 32.8, and we all know James Harden is a very ISO heavy player. And to be honest, I'm sure that rate would be much higher, but he's been dealing with injury, and I don't think he's played in a while, so I'm assuming that's why it's not as high. At number 2, surprisingly, we have Giannis, who has about a 39% usage percentage. So who's number 1? Luka Doncic with a 42.3 usage percentage, which, if the season ended today, would be the highest usage percentage in NBA history in a season. Huh. Well, I'm not really surprised looking at some of these plays.
What the fuck?
Now look, I wouldn't be as critical if the Mavericks were winning games. I'd be like, okay, it's not pretty, it's definitely ugly, but I can understand it. As my old high school football coach once said, there is a method to the madness. So maybe there is a method to this weird looking madness. Oh, they're barely 500. Well, shit. And look, I wouldn't normally be mad at 500 because I would like to assume this Mavericks team would be better than what they are right now. I think they're just struggling a little bit. But if you're an MVP candidate, you cannot be 500 and be taken seriously. So editor Spex here, I'm seeing a trend where people are talking about the Mavericks record right now, and they're justifying it, saying that basically the Mavericks only a couple losses away from being in the playoff hunt and being serious contenders. And that's definitely true in some aspects. The Suns, which are the number 1 seed in the Western Conference, have a 16-6 record, and even if we go off winning percentage, they would be a mid team. It's not like they're 5-5, they're 10-10 right now, which is about 20 games in, which I think is a pretty good sample size. The Western Conference is definitely in a weird spot right now where one team could lose like 2 straight games and they're out of the playoffs, but I can only imagine when we get to like the January point of the season, I can imagine the Mavericks will still be around a 500 team, which if we're talking about Luka Doncic's MVP MVP case, that definitely will hold a factor. Alright, back to present day Spex. Because hold on, we have a narrative that we need to uphold, right guys? Everyone said Jokic's 2 straight MVPs were bullshit because his team was terrible. Sure, they made the playoffs, but the first year they got swept in the second round, and the previous year, which was last season, they lost to the Warriors. And if you're an MVP, shouldn't you make it past the second round? And I'm not even hating on Jokic because 1, I predicted for him to win the MVP, and 2, I love Jokic. I mean, how can you not love this guy? But according to every person last year, if you didn't have a good record, you could not win the MVP. Actually, not a good record. You needed to be like the best team in the NBA. So what team had the best record last season? Oh yeah, the Phoenix Suns, who just so happened to have the best record through a majority of the season. Look, we're not going to talk about that game 7. That shit didn't even happen for real. It was just a really bad dream. Booker was constantly being thrown in the MVP conversations, not only because of his good play, but just because of his team's record. Now I thought even besides the record that I would say Booker was an MVP candidate because of his skill and his stats that he was producing. But to some, it was just solely because of his record. So what the hell am I trying to get at right now? Well, it brings up the question, should a player be evaluated on the MVP award solely on their record? Sure, I could do a film breakdown about Luka Doncic and his play style, and while it's not pretty, he has the stats to back it up. But unfortunately, his team does not have a good record. If the season ended today, they would be barely a play-in team. And if you ask me, I think having a good record should definitely factor in, because if you're the MVP, then your team should be winning. I'm not saying we can only limit it to the best 2 seeds in each respected conference, but I think record definitely does play a factor. And if we factor this in, then Luka should not be an MVP. And I know some Mavericks fans are going to be like, oh, you just don't like Luka because he beat your Suns up, which 1, that didn't even happen. We've already established that. But 2, I predicted Luka would win the MVP at the beginning of the season. And listen, I care very much about my predictions. I have a little bit of an ego because I've been right about the back-to-back MVPs, which just happened to be Jokic, but that's not the point. And I'm gonna be honest, my main factor for Luka winning MVP was I thought the Mavericks were gonna do better. I also thought Luka Doncic was going to develop into a better player and then his play style would improve compared to the ISO ball that he's used to. However, so far into the 20 games we're in right now, none of that has happened. Last year, the Mavericks were 52-30. This year, the Mavericks already have 10 losses, which is 33% of the losses they had last year, and we're like a month or 2 into the season. So if you ask me, nothing has really changed and nothing has really gotten any better. It seems like things might have actually digressed. So what was the whole point of this video? Well, for one, I think we've established that Luka has the talent to win MVP, but unfortunately, I don't think he's gonna win it because of his team success. Also, if we're going off the media and their narratives for the MVP, then record has to play a factor, so Luka shouldn't be in that conversation, which means that Steph Curry cannot be an MVP candidate neither. Now I won't lie, in a future video I definitely want to break down Luka Doncic's game because there are so many flaws in it. It's at the point where it gets kind of just unwatchable to watch Mavericks basketball. I know Luka is a young player, so I'm gonna kind of give him a pass because I know as time goes on he's definitely going to develop his game. But if Luka wants to be an all-time great and win an MVP and win an NBA championship, 1, his team is gonna have to start winning, and 2, he's definitely going to have to make some adjustments into his game, because whatever the fuck the Mavericks are playing right now, this shit is not going to work. Because when they played a very good team last year in the Golden State Warriors, that shit got shut down fast. I mean, they didn't play that many teams in the playoffs. They played, I believe, the Clippers, and then they played the Warriors. Now, but all jokes aside, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Luka Doncic will win the MVP, and you guys will come back to this video and remind me that this was a freezing cold take. But I don't think I'm wrong, because I've seen this play out with James Harden, but that is another conversation for another video.